In this section, we are going to talk about Jdbc, which stands for Java Database Connectivity. The thing is, if we think about software industry, it's all about data. So whatever we do it for data. So even if you're building an application, you are building applications so that you can interact with the data, storing data, fetching data, updating it, and all kind of stuff. Now till this point, we have worked with data, but all your data was getting stored in variables. Example, if you want to store a number, we were using integer. If you want to store a point value, we were using double. The problem with that is, what if you close your application? The moment you close the application, you will lose all your data. So what we want to do is we want to store this data permanently somewhere. Of course, there is one option. You can store your data in a normal file. So maybe you can create a txt file and store your data there. But in txt, it is very difficult to search certain things. It's difficult to have relationship between two things. Example, let's say if you are storing the name and an age of a person. So let's say you have 10 person, and then each person will have their own name and their own age. How will you search a particular age for a particular person? Right? It's very difficult in a text file. So we have a way to solve this, and that is your relational database management system. So basically you can store your data in a tabular format, and that will be a permanent storage. Of course, there are also some in-memory databases available, but let's say by default, most of the DBMS are permanent storage. So what you can do is you can store your data in the database. The only problem is if you want to use this database, you need to use SQL language, which is structured query language. Okay. So as a normal user, if I want to work with the data, I don't need to learn SQL, right? Of course, you will not expect your client to learn SQL. And that's why what you do is you have a database, but then between the user and the database, you'll be having an application. Now this application can be built in any language. Now since we're talking about Java, you can build this application in between with the help of Java language. So a user can interact with the application. Now this is a console based thing. So whatever we have done till now is all console based, right? And the way a user can interact with the console based application is with the help of CMD. Maybe if you want to pass a value, maybe you want to get the value, everything will be happening on that black screen. But what about the connection between the application and database? And that's where we have to use some connectivity, and that connectivity will be given by Jdbc. Now Jdbc is a API. Okay, so it's a part of Java development kit. So it gives you an API to connect with database. But the problem is in this world, we don't have limited DBMS, right? We have a lot of different databases. Example, we have Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, H2, DB2. So we are going to use in this course Postgres. Okay, now Postgres is very famous. Of course, you can use any DBMS which you like. Personally, I prefer Postgres if given a choice. Otherwise, if a client says they already have some kind of DBMS installed, we'll go for that one. But we are going to use Postgres. Now the problem is, as DBMS changes, don't you think this connectivity code will also change? Now we are saying that we have to connect Java with Postgres and it's working. What if in future you want to connect with MySQL? Now the problem is how many lines of code you're going to change. That's tricky, right? So what Java says is, okay, we have a Jdbc API. Now we will just give you interfaces and few classes to work with, but the actual implementation will be given by the DBMS itself. So if Postgres says, okay, I have a DBMS and I'm allowing Java application to connect, they have to provide the implementation for this. Same goes for MySQL, same goes for other companies. So that means if you want to connect your Java application with database, of course you can use Jdbc in Java, but you need actual implementation from DBMS. So they will provide you some library to work with. So in this particular series, we need to first make sure that you have your DBMS installed. We'll see that how we do it. Next, we also need a jar file, the library to connect this to. And how to do that, that we'll see in the upcoming videos. Now basically to understand Jdbc properly, we have to implement the code, right? And to implement, we also need a database. So we are going to use Postgres as I mentioned before, but how do you get Postgres in your machine? And also if you want to work with some other DBMS, that's your choice. So you can install MySQL or any other DBMS you want. But here we are going to use Postgres and we have to change only few or one or two lines if you want to connect to some other DBMS. Okay, so how do you get Postgres? It's very simple. Just go to Google and search for Postgres download. Or maybe you can just search for postgresSQL.org. That's the website, the official website. And recently they have also came up with Postgres 16. In my machine, I think I have 15, but that's fine. There is some performance improvement, nothing major which will change the syntax of it. So we are good. Okay, so to download, you can simply click on download here, and depend upon your OS, you can select which one you have. So example, in my machine, I'm using Mac, so I can click on Mac. If you're using Windows, click on Windows. If you're using Linux, click on Linux. Now, since I'm using Mac, you can click on this, and it will give you an installer. Of course, you can select which one you want, and you can click on this. By default, I think it will give you 16. So you can simply click on this download the installer. You can select the version, which is 16. So as I mentioned, by default, it will be 16. Click. Okay, so it will download in some time, and you can see here it started downloading. Okay, now once the download is complete, steps are very simple. You have to say next, next, next. It will ask you for the password. Now make sure that your password is difficult to remember. Okay, I mean difficult for others to crack and easy for you to remember. For my machine, I'm using a password which is 000 because this is only my testing machine. I don't do my actual work on this machine. But if you are using it for production or in your workplace, make sure that you have your password set up properly. Okay, once you do that, so what it will also give you, it will give you two things. First, it will give you the Postgres database, which is running behind the scene. And to access it, it will also give you pgadmin. So if you, in the prompt, if it gives you an option of installing pgadmin, please make sure it is selected. So that you will get pgadmin. So once you install the Postgres, you can simply search for pgadmin 4. I mean, I think I have 4. The pgadmin version, not the Postgres version. And when you open this, it will take some time to load. Now, since I'm not doing this for the first time on this machine, you might get some extra prompts. Make sure that you enter relevant data there. So here it says, okay, I have a password. I have to enter a password to unlock this. So what I will do is I will enter the password, which is 0000, 4 times 0, click on OK. So let's get familiar with the interface here. So on the left hand side, if you can see, we have something called the Object Explorer. Now this is where you have your servers. If you expand this, so I only have one version of Postgres, which is Postgres 15. So when you install, you will get 16. And when I expand this, it will give me an option of database. I think by default, it will not be having any database, or it will have, I think it will have one by default. But I have created multiple for different videos and different things. If you want to create a database, you can use this one. We'll come back to this later. Also, we have something called dashboard. If you want to see some stats about the operations, you can see it here. Properties, you can see it here. In fact, in the dashboard, we should also see the port number. Anyway, so you can see we have some properties to set. Anything by default, everything works. You can also write some SQL query. These are some stats and the running process. At this point, I don't have anything running, but it will come up. So let's get back to dashboard. And if you want to write SQL query, you can click on this as well. But once you select your database, I think it will come. Anyway, so if you want to create a database, how will you do it? Right click on your database and you can see there's an option of new or create. So create database. It will ask you for a database name. So I will say this is a demo. Of course, not a good name for the database, but since I'm going to delete this database after this tutorial series, I have demo there. Then the owner, we can create different owners. We can give different permissions. By default, it says Postgres. Let's go with that. Anything to configure? Okay, looks good. So it will also generate a SQL query for database creation. So you can make some changes if you want, but I'm happy. I got my database, click on save, and you can see we got a database called demo. Now in this database, I can create some tables. So what I will do is I will just go back to my schemas, because this is where you will get your tables. And inside this schema, if you see public, inside that you have tables and it's empty. So by default, we don't have any table. So let's create one. So you can right click here. Of course, you can create from the SQL query as well. But in case if you're not familiar with SQL, that's fine. You can click on create table. It will ask you for a table name. Now I can go with any table name here. So let me go with a typical one, which is student, just to make it easy. And then once you mention the table name, the next thing you have to mention is the column. How many columns you're going to have? So you can create different columns here. So I can say the column name is SID, which is the student ID. The type of the data I'm going to go with is integer. And then I want this to be a primary key. So every table will have a primary key, which represents that if you want to access data from this table, this is the column you have to refer. And it will also make sure that you have things unique. You don't have any duplicate values. You can also set this as not null. Basically, if you say not null, it means every student will have a SID for sure. Okay, that's one. Next, I want to say sname, which is a student name. So I want to go with char array and nothing much. Next, I want one more. Let's say marks. Okay, we can go with multiple columns, but just to keep it simple, I'm going for few. We got marks, and I want marks to be integer as well. And click on save. The moment you do that, it will create a table for you. So you can see we got a student table, and you can right click this and you can view data. So you can say view all rows, and at this point this is empty. Of course, right, we don't have any data there. So how do you insert data? So I think you have a way to do that from here, or you can do it from the console. So I think query tool is here, not there. So this is the query tool. Basically, this is where you can write query to insert data. So we have to write SQL query. If you're not familiar with SQL, that's fine. Just try to understand what I'm doing. So for inserting data, we have to use insert query. So I have to say insert into the table name is student. Then you have to specify the column name as well. But again, column names are optional if you're going for all the columns. So I can simply say values, and then you can specify the value in the bracket. If it is an integer, you can directly mention the integer. If it is a string, you have to use single quote, and you can mention, let's say, Naveen. And then the marks is, let's say, 50. So that's the first row we have. And if you want this data to be inserted, you have to execute this. Just by typing the query, it will not work. So you can just say run. Okay, so we got an error. Basically, I think I messed up with the type of data. So we need to change it. So how do I do that? Do we have a way to alter the data here? So let me go to properties and let's see if I can do that from here. Let's go to columns. And do we have some other thing? No. Parameters. SQL. Okay. So this is something messed up. So instead of this char, it should be text. But I'm not able to change it. Okay. Edit. This is of type definition. So that's okay. So let's do one more thing. Instead of doing this from here, let's delete this column and let's insert another column here. So when you try this, make sure that you have mentioned it properly. In fact, I will delete marks as well, otherwise it will affect the sequence. So this is as name. So one thing you have to select is text. Now this is what happens when you switch between different DBMS, because in different DBMS we have different style. Example, in Oracle we use varchar, in MySQL we use char array, in Postgres we have to use text, and next we'll say marks, and marks is integer. Save. Okay, so done the changes. Let's try to run this query now. Run, and it works. You can see it says insert query. Insert done. And how do you view that? So you can just go here and say view all rows, and you can see, you will see one data now. That's working. Next, if you want to insert some more data, again you can go to query table and you can write the query once again. So yeah, that's how basically you use Postgres. Further, we'll also see how do you do that from the Java code with the help of Jdbc. Now once we have our Postgres ready, so you can, in the last video we have talked about how do you set up the Postgres SQL, how do you create a database. Now I hope you remember the configuration. It's time to connect your Java application with Postgres. But the problem is, okay, not a problem, but then we have to follow some steps, right? So the concept we are going to implement between the application and database is Jdbc. To achieve that, the first thing we need is a jar file. As I mentioned before, your DBMS basically provides you a library which is an implementation of Jdbc connectors. Okay, so we need to get that library, which is a jar file in Java. Then we have to write a Java code. Now in that as well, we have to follow certain steps. So we'll do the Java file later, but let's understand the steps we have to do. Now, JDBC follows different steps. In fact, in some books, they say 5 steps. Somewhere you will see 6 steps. I used to say 7 steps, but then the number of steps doesn't matter. The steps matters because we have a different name for it. So let's go with this. I will start with the 7 steps and then I will mention which one is optional and which one mixed with other, so that whenever you read any other book or any other article, if they say different number of steps, you will know what I'm talking about, okay, or what you have learned from me. Okay, the first step is once you got your jar file, we have to basically import the packages. So in Java, we know that different interfaces, different class belong to different packages. So we have to get that package, which is java.sql. So we have to import this package. That's the first step. The second step is basically to load the driver. Now the driver is actually coming from the jar file, right? And that's why we need the jar file. So every implementation will have their own drivers. So we have to load the driver. Then we have to register the driver. Now, if you want to understand this properly, let's take it for an example and then we can connect with this too. So let's say you are working from home and then few of your colleagues are working from office and now you want some information. So let's say you want to know what is happening in the office. So what you will do is you will call your friend or you will call your colleague basically. The thing is, before calling, of course, you will be using your phone. Yes, we have other options, but let's say you have a phone with you. And if you want to call, first of all, you need a phone. I mean, that's important, right? Without phone, how will you call? Now that's your jar file. You want a jar file. Next, you have to make sure that you have registered, you have a SIM card which is working, and also you have a network in your area or the place where you are. Now that is your loading and registering the driver. Now once you got a network, the next thing you will do is you have to make a connection. Of course, you have to make sure that you have a network as well as you have, you can call people. So that's your making sure that you have a connection. Now once you have a connection with your phone, everything is working. And of course, after that you will ring. So you will dial the number and then there will be a ring on your friend's phone. Now at this point, even before saying something, you will think what you want to say, right? So you will think and then once your friends pick up the call, you will have some greeting messages, good morning, good afternoon, or whatever local thing you talk to your friends. You will talk about those things and then you will shoot your actual question. And then from that side, your friend will give you some response. Now you have to process the response. And once you have done with the processing, you will simply close the connection. Of course, you have to cut the call, otherwise you have to pay a huge bill. So basically, you have to follow these steps. In the same way, if you want to do that in JDBC, let's go with this first step. Import the package, done. Then we have to load and register driver, which is basically make sure that you have a registered SIM card. Then you have to make sure that you also have a connection. So that's a connection object in JDBC. Then you have to execute a statement. Now, when you say you have to create or execute a statement, basically you have to think what you want to say and then you have to say it, that is execute the statement. Then you have to process the result. So basically whatever response you get from your friend, you have to process it. That's one more step. And the last step, once you complete all the thing, you will simply close the connection, which is very important. Otherwise you will be leaking the memory and the connections. So those are these 7 steps which you follow. So again, 7 steps based on this. 5, so some people say 6 steps because they ignore the importing packages, so you can ignore that part as well. And somewhere you will see 5 steps. Basically you will have load and register as single step. So that's one thing. But also JDBC has different versions. So I started working on JDBC from JDBC 3. At that point, registering and loading the driver was compulsory. But after JDBC 4.0, which was introduced in Java 6, you don't have to basically load and register by yourself. It will be automatically done the moment you add the jar file to your project. So yeah, so those also steps are optional. So you can focus on creating the connection, executing the statement, getting the results, process the results, and close the connection. So yeah, that's about the introduction or the steps for the JDBC. Okay, so now let's start coding. So what we need is a IDE. Of course, you can use any IDE which you love. I'm going to use for this section, which is IntelliJ. Now, IntelliJ is one of the most famous IDE available for Java. It has two versions, the community version and the ultimate version. The ultimate version is a paid version. The community version is free, so you can use that. That perfectly works. In this machine, I do have the ultimate version, but whatever I'm doing in this, you can also do that in community version. Okay, nothing different. So the first thing we need is IntelliJ IDE. So let me open IntelliJ. Okay, so I clicked on the new project. So when you open IntelliJ, it will ask you for a new project. So I will do that, and I will say this is Jdbc course. Okay, we got double C, but okay, so that looks cool. So we got Jdbc course as the project name. I want to keep this in different folder, but download works because anyway, I'm going to delete this once the course is done. And then the language is Java. Now, IntelliJ provides you different build systems. So I'm going to use IntelliJ here. You can also use Maven or Gradle, that's your choice. But let's go for IntelliJ if you're not familiar with this too. The JDK, I'm using 17, but anything above 8 should work. And that's it. Click on create. You will get your project. Now this is a very simple project which you have here, and everything is empty by default. Now important thing is this. If you can see in the external libraries, we only have one library, right, which is for Java. I want one more for Jdbc, right, and that too from the Postgres. So what we need to do is we need to download this jar file. How will you get this? It's very simple. Just go to Google and search for Postgres driver for Jdbc, and you can see you will get the first link, which is URL jdbc.postgresql.org. Click on this, and this will give you an option of downloading a jar file. So you can see it says Postgres Jdbc driver. Likewise, if you want some other DBMS, you can also search for the driver on that. So you will get it here. There's one more option. You can basically go to MVN repository, which is the Maven repository, and search for Postgres Jdbc. This should work. And you can download it from here. So you have multiple options. You can download from here. You can check for the version. I think this should work. There are a lot of usage of this. So you can click here and there will be option of a jar file. If you can see this, and you can click on download, it will be done. That's one option. The second option is this. You can download from the official websites. Both should work. Click on this download here. It will ask you for which version you want. So anything about 8 should work for us because that is providing 4.2. You can see the version here, 42.6.0. The same is available on the Maven repository, which is 42.6.0. So you can get it from anywhere. I will click on download, and you can see it is downloading the jar file. Now, since I'm doing this for the second time, you can see we have an option here. It says the second version, but anyway, you will get only one. Now, once you got the download, go back to your IntelliJ. And here we have to add them, right? The way you do that is by going to File and Project Structure. Here you will find an option of libraries. Click on this. And you can see at this point we don't have an external library. Click on plus. You want a Java library. And whenever you have downloaded it, just select and open. You will see an option. Okay, that's a project. Okay. And you got your jar file here. Click on Apply. And okay, you will see the Postgres jar file is here. And once you get this, you can basically use the classes here. Now, if you open this, there are a lot of different classes. We are going to use Postgres, Jdbc. Inside this, there are multiple classes or interfaces we are going to use. So we will not be using them directly. Jdbc behind the scene will use this library. Okay, so that's about the library. Now we can write our 7 steps, the actual code. And let's do that in the next video. Now let's follow those steps and write the code. So what we will do is in the src folder, now this is an important folder because that's where all your file goes. So we'll right click here and say new. I will create a Java file and we can name anything to this. Let's say this is demo jdbc.java. Of course, .java will be given there. Now this is your file, okay? And of course, we also need a main method, so let's have it there. And now here we'll write those 7 steps. So first of all, in the comments, I'll mention those 7 steps here, okay? So that we can, when you write the code, it will make much more sense. The first thing is we have to do the import the package. The next one, we have to say load and register. Of course, this is optional, but let's say we have it there. Then we will do a connection. So I will say create connection, and then I will say create a statement. Now this is where you basically think what to say, right? And then you basically execute this statement. Then you process the results. And last you will say close. Now if you see, these are 7 steps, right? But again, in few books they ignore this, and then this is also optional. And some people also mix these two together. So again, doesn't matter. But these are the general steps you have to follow. Now when you say you have to do the importing, it's very simple now. You can simply go back on the top and say import java.sql.star. Now we need everything from that package, so that's one step done. So this is done. Then we have to go for load and register the driver. So what I will do here is, how do you load and register? Now basically the driver, in different databases we have different driver. So example here, if I say org.postgres.driver, now this is the driver we have to load. But again, this is optional step. So, but even if you want to do this, you can simply say class.for_name, and then you can put this in double quotes. So whatever you have to written here, just cut that and paste it here. Now this is how you basically load the driver. Now this might throw an exception. I will simply say throws exception. Of course you can use try catch, but it will just make the code look complex. I would suggest you to use try catch because that's a good practice. Now since I'm teaching, I just want to make sure that code looks clean for you to understand. Okay, so second step is also done, load register done. Next we have to create a connection. Now connection basically means you have to connect your application to the database. And the way you do that is by creating a connection object. So you have to say connection con. And this connection will be coming from java.sql, no problem with that. And you can say equal to, can I say new connection? The problem is the connection is a interface. It's not a class. So we have to look for a implementation for this. So what you can do is, there's something called driver manager, which is a utility class, in which you have a method called get connection. So basically it gives you the implementation, right? So you can see we have a connection. So get connection returns the object of connection. So we are good with that. Now this get connection basically asks you for 3 parameters. The first one, the second one, and the third one. Now IntelliJ helps you with the thing as well. What is this first one? What is the second one? Third one? Okay, it might throw an exception. So of course we can simply say throw. So we are basically throwing two exceptions now. In fact, just to keep it simple, I can say throws exception. It can handle anything now. Okay, so you can see it is asking for 3 things: URL, username, and password. Now, what is this URL? Now, of course, right, you're connecting your Java application with database. So your Java should know which DBMS you're working with. Of course, you have mentioned that here, but also you have to provide the database name, the connection URL. Now, Postgres, MySQL, all these are network databases, right? Basically, they are available through a network. So basically, you have to mention the IP address and the port number. So what I will do is, let me create, or maybe I can do that here itself. So I will create 3 variables. The first one is URL, and let's keep it empty. The next one is username, or we can say uname just to have a small words. And string password. So I will say pass. Okay, so we got these 3 things. The password. So basically the username and password is for my DBMS. And this keep changes depend upon your DBMS. Okay, so if you're using Postgres, by default it will have a username password, Postgres, but of course you can change it. You can have some different username. You have to configure that from your Postgres database. Next, you have to mention the password. Now, this has to be very strong, and that's why I have 4 zeros. Then the URL. Now, what is this URL is all about? So URL says, I follow 3 steps. The first step is Java will be connecting with what? So Java will be connecting with Jdbc. Okay. Jdbc will connect with the database name, which is, or DBMS, which is your Postgres. So it's PostgreSQL. Then you have to mention your database name. Database name is demo, if I'm not wrong. Let's go back to Postgres. Yeah. So the database we have created earlier is demo. Let's verify once if this is what we were doing earlier. Yeah. So we're working with student, right? So these are the data for the student. We got only 1 at this point, but things are working out. So you can see we got this data here. Okay. So we have to mention 3 things: Jdbc, Postgres, SQL, and demo. If you're using MySQL, this becomes MySQL. Okay, if you're using Oracle, this becomes Oracle. This is that simple. The only thing is this demo database available on the network. So you have to mention the IP address and the port number. So the way you do that is by mentioning this below. This is on the same machine, so we can say localhost. You don't have to mention the IP address. If you're on some other machine on the network, you have to mention the IP address. Then you have to mention the port number. For Postgres, the port number is 5432, and for MySQL, the default port number is 3306. And as your DBMS changes, your port number also changes. And you will get to know this when you are doing the setup for the Postgres or any DBMS. It will show the port number. So just note it down what the port number is, and then you can use it. And then you can mention database name, and that perfectly works. Now these three things you have to mention here. So the URL is URL itself. The password, the username is uname, and the password is pass. So the data is there in this variables, and we are happy. Okay, now this looks cool, whatever we have mentioned here. The next thing we have to do is we have to execute, right? But before even we execute, we need to make sure, we need to test if things are working out. Are we really connected? So what I will do is after this line, I will simply print something on the console by saying connection established, just to know if things are working out. Okay, but initially we'll not be doing this directly. What we will do is let's make some mistakes so that we'll know something is going on. So let's say instead of password specifying as 5 characters or 4 characters, I'm saying 5 zeros, which is not correct. It should give you error. Also, I will make some errors in here. So let's say this is MySQL, not Postgres. Let's make some mistakes. And now let's run this. Just right click here, run, and it should take some time. And you can see we got an error here. It says no suitable driver found for Jdbc MySQL. Reason being, we are using Postgres, right? So that's the driver we have installed. So I have to say PostgreSQL. Let's make one change. And now if you run this, we got errors, but different error. It says there's no problem with the URL now. The problem is with the password. So it says password authentication failed. Okay, it's because we have entered a wrong password. Let's run this. And now you can see it says connection established. So that's right. Your Jdbc, your Java and database are able to communicate. So that's the first step. In fact, we have done with the 3 steps. Also, as I mentioned, this is optional. So if I comment this part and if I run this, it will still work. So this is not compulsory now. So you can, even if you forgot this line, that's completely fine. Most of the time I don't even remember this. I was just doing some experiment in the video and I got to know this. But anyway, so that's not important. That is something you can skip it. Now, how do you create a statement? How do you get the results? That we'll see in the next video. So we are able to establish the connection, right? That is done. So we have imported the package, load register done, creating connection done. But now it's time to create a statement. Now what we are doing here, so we have a Java code and we want to connect to a database, but why? To fetch some data, right? So if you see, in fact, to fetch or save data, but in general, we want to do something with database. So here we have a database, right? In which the database name here is demo, in which you have a table called student, in which you basically have 3 columns, and when we only have 1 row here. So let's say I want to fetch the sname. That's it. I just want to fetch the name of a person or name of a student based on the ID. So ID here is 1. How do we do that? Of course, if you want to use SQL directly, you can just open your query tool. And if you want that one record, you can say select star or select sname, because we only want name from the table name is student, where SID is equal to 1. So basically we are writing a query where you are saying, hey, I want a name of a student where the SID is 1. Let's run this and see what happens. And you can see in the output you got Naveen, and that's what we want. So how do we do that from Java? So of course we need a statement to do that. And the way you can get this statement is by creating a reference object for statement. So I will say statement here and say st. Now the thing is, statement itself is a interface, as you can see here. So how do you get an instance for this? It's very simple. the con, which is the connection object, has a method called create connection. So it will basically creates the object for statement for you. So you don't have to worry about what is happening behind the scene. What we are concerned about, hey, did we got this statement object? Answer is yes, we are happy. Now, once you got statement, don't you think we have to also think about what you want to say? So, we have to make, if you want to ask a question to someone, you basically create a question in your mind or a statement in your mind what you want to say. Now, in order to talk to database, we basically have to write a query. So what I will do is I will say, create a variable here called query. And in this, I'm going to basically have a query. But what query? Very simple. We have done that before in SQL. So let's copy this and paste it here. Now, this is the exact query which I'm going to fire. Okay. Now, question arises, how do I fire? So we have done with the create statement. When you say you want to fire, you need to say execute a statement. How difficult that can be? Let's try. So st, the reference object for statement, if you say dot here, so you can see we have multiple execute here, but then in SQL as well, we have different type of queries. Basically, we have select query, which will give you data. And then there are some other queries which will change something in database. It can create a new row. It will update an existing row. It might create a new column. So we can do a lot of different things in database with the help of SQL. But when we talk about select query, it will not change anything from database. It will simply fetch the data. Now to do that, if you want to fetch data, we have to use execute query. But yeah, if you want to change something, then you have to say execute. Okay. But at this point, we are not changing anything. We are just fetching data. So I can say execute query, but this execute query will basically needs a query itself. In fact, there is one more way. Instead of using a query as a variable, let's use SQL. That makes much more sense, right? So this is a query. And I want to get it here. Now, we have also done with the execute statement. So we are basically executing a SQL query. But the thing is, it will return something, right? Where are we storing it? Nowhere. So if you see execute query as a method, it returns result set. So that means whatever data you're getting from your database is actually getting stored in a result set. So that's what we're doing here. We are storing data in result set. So result set is also an interface. So what it will do is it will return you the type of or instance of result set, and you got it. Okay, so we were able to talk to database. We are able to connect to database. We were able to execute a statement, and we got response as well. Okay, but the problem is, how do I print this data? So first of all, I want to know if there's any response. So I will say rs dot. Do we have any method which shows did we got any response from database? So what you can do is there is a method called next. Now if you observe the method next, it gives you a boolean value. Now why someone will give you a boolean value? If it will give you true or false. So behind the scene what it does is it executes the query. If you have a next row, then it returns true. If you don't have a next row, it will return false. So if you're able to get the data with the query which you have, it will return true. So let's try to print it and let's see what happens. So I will simply print the rs.next, and if it prints true, then that means we are able to get some data. If it prints false, we have not got data. Okay. So I think things are working out. We were able to process result as well. In this case, when you say processing the data, what we are doing is we are simply printing true or false if you got the data or not. Okay, we forgot one important step, which is close. It's very important for you to close the connection. First of all, let me just write this statement here. So once you get the connection done, this is what it should print. At the end, we need to say con.close. It's so simple to close a connection. We don't have to write any complex logic for it. Just say con.close, it will close the connection. Okay, and things are looking good. In fact, I should also print connection closed. Okay, and now let's see if this works. Let's rerun this, and in the output you can see it says connection established because that's what we have done at the start. Then it prints true, which means you got some data, and then it also says connection closed. Now how do I prove that it got some data? What I will do is let me just change the query. So let me fetch a name for person or a student where the SID is 2. Now if you see the database, we don't have any student whose SID is 2. So you can see it's empty. So basically this should return false, and you can see we got false. So yeah, so whatever we are doing, it actually works. But then I don't want to print true or false, right? I want to print the real data. How do I do that? So what we can do is here, instead of printing the rs.next, how do I get the data? So what I will do is, I will simply say rs dot. Now it has multiple methods if you see. So basically we have a get string which takes the column index. Then we got a get string which take column name. And then we also have a get int if you're working with integer type. We have a lot of different methods. Here, if you focus on get string, basically get string gives you a string data for a particular column. Now what I mean by that? So here when I say get string and if I say sname, it will give me the data of this column sname, because if you go back here and if I say 1 and run this, you can see it is printing Naveen here, right? But if you look at the column name, it is sname, okay? So that is what we want. We want the name Naveen, which is there in the sname, and that's what we are mentioning here. Now, why we need to mention the column name? It's because sometime when you fire a query, you might be getting multiple columns, and you have to specify which one you want. In this case, we're only fetching one column, so you might be thinking why we have to even mention the column name. But we might get multiple columns, so this is better option. But if you don't want to go for the column names, you can also go with column numbers. So if you have 5 columns to fetch, you can mention, hey, I want the first column, I want the second column, you can mention that. But I personally prefer the column names is because sometime the numbers will be confusing, right? And if you misplace a particular number, you will get bugs, and then it will take a lot of time for debugging what went wrong. So it's better to go for column name. You'll be very sure which column you're fetching. Okay, so this will give you a string, right? Of course, you have to store it somewhere. So I will say string name is equal to, so basically whatever data you got from here, we are storing that in a name variable, and we can simply print the name. I can say name of a student is, and I can say plus name. So whatever data I'm receiving from here, I'm just printing it. Nothing fancy. Simple stuff. Let's see if this works. Run this code and we got an error. Okay, expected. So the thing is, it says result set not positioned properly. What it means. So the thing is, when you are fetching data, at this point, luckily we only got one row. It is possible that in this table, you might be having multiple rows. And in general, normally we have a table which has multiple rows. Now, when you say get string, okay, so here, when you say get string for a particular column, which row data you're fetching. So let's say we have 5 rows here with different names. GetString will give you which data. Now you might be saying, hey, isn't it obvious we want the first record? Yes, it is. But to provide a better experience, what they do is, by default, your pointer will be before the first row. So here, the pointer, if you're thinking, should be here. When you say getString, it is actually before the name. So even before you fetch data, what you need to do is, you have to say rs.next. What it will do is, it will go to the first location. In fact, not the first location, depend upon where you are writing this. So if you just executed the query, the next will be first row. So we can use next. What it does is, if you are before the first line, and when you say next, it will go to the first record. And after doing this, let's run this and let's see what happens. And we got the data. You can see it says name of a student is Naveen. So yes, it is able to fetch data from database. And we got what we wanted. But let's go for some complex stuff. Let's see if you can fetch multiple columns with different data in the database. That we'll see in the next video. So let's insert some data in database so that we can fetch with different IDs. So if you go back to your pgadmin, we need to insert some data here, right? The way you can do that, of course, you can use SQL queries, and let's try that. So what I will do is I will say insert into student, and you can say values. So what you're going to insert, let's say the ID is 2, then we have to mention the data. So let's say I'm going for Kiran, and then what's the next column? I forgot the column names. That's weird. Okay, so we got marks here. Let's say marks is 50. In fact, you can enter multiple columns if you want, or multiple rows. But let's say, let's run this, and you can see we got one more query executed, one more data inserted. So this time we'll say Harsh, and let's say this is 55. Run. We got one more. And let's take one more last, which is Social, and let's say the marks is 45. Okay, so we inserted all these records here, as you can see. And now let me see, in fact, let's fire the select query. So it says select star from student. It should return all the data now. Let's run. And you can see we got 4 rows here. And this looks good, right? Now what I want to do is I want to fetch this data and show it on the Java code. In fact, I want to print all, not just one. Because at this point we are printing only a name, right? I want to print the entire data set. So I want to print all 4 rows with all 3 columns. Okay, how do we do that? First of all, we need to change the query. So instead of saying select sname, we have to say select star from student. Then we don't need a where clause because we are fetching everything. And then I want to fire a query. So this is where we are firing a query. But let's say this will change. So what I will do is I will just comment this section because this is going to change. Now, when you say you want to fetch all the rows, now we are not sure how many rows we have in the table. Of course, right? We can have 5 rows, 10 rows, 200 rows. In this case, we know it's 4 rows, but then in general, we'll not be knowing that. And we don't want to do that manually every time. Of course, you can say rs.next, it will basically shift the pointer. But if you want to do it in a automated way, what you can do is you can use a loop here. And this loop should run till you have a data. But then how do you know how much data you have, how much rows you have? So what you can do is you can use something called rs.next. Now rs.next has a multiple things. It does 2 things basically. First, it will check, do we have a next row? If it is yes, it will shift to next row. So this while loop basically runs for all the rows because rs.next giving you the status, right? Do we have a next row available? And also rs.next also makes sure that it is shifting to the new row. So that's done. We are basically jumping from row to row. But what is the data you are going to return? Because we are filing a query which will return all 3 columns, right? So in this case, we have to take 3 variables, not 1, 3 variables. Or maybe you can print it something like this. Instead of printing it in a new line, you can print the first data. So I can say rs.get int because that's an integer type, right? Now you have a choice. You can mention the column number or column name. So let's say this time we'll go for numbers. And the only thing is you have to remember the sequence. The sequence is SID, SNAME and marks. So integer, string, integer. So that's the first thing I've done. Again, you can print a space if you want here because that should look good. So at the end, I will just give a colon to separate this 2, or maybe you can also use hyphen to separate two different data. And the same thing can be done here, but this time it should be, instead of saying get int, I should say get string. The column number is 2, and at the end, I will say get int again, and this is column number 3. And at the end, we don't want to print the hyphen, so we can remove this. So what it will do is, as your rs.next keep jumping between the rows or next row, we are printing all the columns of each row. Okay, if that makes sense. And then I also want to make sure that the next printing will be happening on the next line. So here, in fact, for the last row, or let me show you how it looks like if you don't print on new line. So let's run this. And you can see we got all the data in one single row. This is not what we want. So what we can do is for the last thing, for the last row, for the last statement, I'm just saying ln, which means it should print this and come on new line. So what will happen is this should print something like this. Yeah. So it is actually simple if you understand the basic concept. So if your foundation is clear, you can do whatever changes you want. So one thing to remember is rs.next will give you the next line, or it will give you the next row. Also, basically it will not give you the next row. It will put a pointer to the next row. And also it will check, do we have a next row available or not? And then using get int, get string, you can fetch a particular column. Okay, it's that simple. So by doing this, we were able to get all the data here. But how about inserting data? What if you want to insert something? How that will work? So that we'll see in the next video. Okay, so we were able to get the data, right? So we fetched the data, the single name, and then we tried to print the entire table. Now, when you want to print the entire table, that means you have multiple rows and we are not sure how many rows we have. And then we have 3 columns which we are going to fetch. Now, of course, you can also automate this part here where you're not sure how many columns you have. So you can use one more loop inside the while loop. So the outer while loop is responsible to count the number of rows, and the inner loop, whichever loop you want to use, maybe a while loop or a for loop, you can do it for the columns. Now, of course, the for loop make much more sense here because we know the numbers. We can execute one more query to get the number of columns you have or some properties. But anyway, this thing works, and you can use a loop if you want. So we were able to fetch data, right? What about inserting data? Is it really possible? Of course, right? It should be possible because when you are connecting your application with database and a user may want to add some new records. So there's something called CRUD operations, right? Which is create, read, update, and delete. So we were able to read. So the R part is done. But what about the create? What about the update? What about delete? So let's try to do that. So what will remain common is the establishing the connection. After that, things will start changing. So of course you need connect statement as well. So that will remain same. Things will change from here. Okay. So what I will do is I will delete this part from here because that's something we want to change. And here in the SQL, the query will change. Now what will be the query? Now when you say you want to insert data, of course that should be an insert query. And in fact, we have done that before. So if you remember in the PLSQL, we executed some queries to insert the data, right? So the same thing can be done here. The query was very simple. It is insert into, you have to mention the table name. Table name is student. And then you can mention the column name as well if you want, but that is optional if you want to insert all the columns. So you can simply say values, and then in the round brackets, you can insert the values. Now what value I want to insert? So already we have 5 records, right? So we have 4 records. Let's insert the 5th one. And here in the 5th one, I will say single quote, this is John. And then I want to insert some marks as well. So let's say John has marks, which is 48. So that's my query. I want to execute this query. So in this table, which we already have 4 records, let me just see how many records we have. Yeah, we have 4. So we want to insert a new record, which is 5, John, and 48. Okay, how do I achieve that? It's very simple. Go back here and we want to execute. Now, how do you execute? So of course we got a statement. So we can say st dot. Now, if you remember, when we were reading data, we executed a method called execute query. So execute query makes sense when you want to get data, okay, because it returns result set. This time we want to execute a query which will return something else. So we have something called execute here. So we can simply say execute, and we can pass the query, which is SQL. So what it will do is it will execute the query. Now what it returns, so if you click on execute, you can see execute returns a Boolean type here. So it will return we were able to insert data or not. That's what you will get here. So what we can do is we can get into a variable called Boolean status. So in the status, it will say true or false, right? And then first of all, let me print the status, whatever status we have. So we'll say status. And then once you execute that, it should be there in database, right? So we'll see. So I will just execute this to see if things are working out. So point, remember, the SQL query will change because we are inserting data. And then we will be saying execute here to execute the query. And let's see if this works. So we'll just go back here and run this once again. You will see the output here. So it says connection established. That's great. But it says false. Status is false here. So it was not able to execute. Let's go back and refresh. I'll say view all rows. The data is there. Data is there. So why it says false? So if I go to execute, let's see what it says. So executes a given statement which may returns multiple results. In some situation, a single execute may returns multiple results set or update. Normally you can ignore this unless you are... Okay, so basically it returns true if the first result is a result set object. So no, this is not a result set object, this is a count. So basically when you insert the query, so you know, this thing is actually interesting here. When you go back, remember when we executed the execute query? So execute query for sure returns a result set. But this execute can return different type of data. If it can return a result set, if it is a SQL query or the select query, it will return the count if it is an insert or update query. So let's say if you want to update some data. So of course it will mention how many rows have been updated. So it returns false when you are executing a insert, update or delete query. So that's fine. So when you say false here, it means it was a insert statement or insert or update, not a select query. So there was some confusion there. Anyway, so we got the output, right? And it was able to insert data, and that's something we wanted to get. Okay, go back here, and this is working. So inserting working. Can we do the update? Let's try. So how do you run the update query? It's very simple. Go back here and change this query. So what I will do is I will say update. So how update query works is you say update, and then you mention the table name. So I will say update student, and then what you want to update. So I will say set the S name is equal to. So I want to change one S name there, which is which one I want to change. So I want to change, let's say John itself. So I don't want this name to be John. I want this to be Johnny, or maybe something else. Maybe let's say Max. So I want to change this John to Max for the ID 5. So how do we do that? It's very simple. You say set S name to Max. But then when you execute this one, it will execute all the rows. We don't want it. We just want to change one row. So you can mention the where clause where the SID is equal to 5. So that's the SQL query. Again, we are not learning SQL here. We're learning Jdbc. So just go with this. And if you're good with SQL, you know what I'm doing here. Okay, so we just have to change this and then execute the same thing. We don't need to print the status. We now know how it works. In fact, we don't even need to accept this. Normally we don't do that. And let's say run and let's see what happens. Execute this. Everything worked. There is no error. Let's get back to our database to see things are working out. So right click here and say view all rows. And now you can see the data has been changed from John to Max. So that is done. Okay. So that's how you can basically do the update query. How about delete query? So we can do that as well. So I can just change this query. So from update, let's say I want to delete Max. I don't want to work with Max anymore. So I can say delete from student where SID is equal to 5. Because if you say delete from student, it will delete all the records. We don't want it. So we can specify what ID or what row we want to delete. So we want to delete the SID 5. Nothing changes here in the code. Only the SQL query will change. Let's run this and you can see there is no problem. Let's verify from database. Right click here and say view all rows, and that's done. You can see there is no Max anymore there. So things are working out. That's how basically you do the update, insert and delete. So basically by doing this, we have completed our CRUD operations. Okay, things are looking good, right? But with the statement, we have the advanced version of statement. So there's something called prepared statement. Now how that works, we'll see in the next video. So before getting into prepared statement, let's understand why do we need prepared statement, right? So what I will do here is if I go back to my SQL query and let's go for inserting data. So what I will do is I will say insert into, and let's insert data into student values. And we know that we have to also insert the actual values. But let's say if these values are coming from the user. So maybe I'm getting the data from the console or from the beautiful web page. Doesn't matter. What we have is we got some data from the user. So let's say the user is entering the SID and the SID is, let's say 101, and then a user is entering the S name as well, which is your S name. Let's go for Max again. And then we got int some marks. Yeah. So marks is, let's say 48 again. So we got these three values here. And then I want to insert these values in here. Now the way you can do that is, first of all, if you directly mention the SID and S name and marks, this will not work. Is because we are putting that in double quotes. And the way Java works is whatever there in the double quotes will be treated as a string itself. We want SID, but not the actual SID. We want the value of it. Same goes for S name, same goes for marks. So basically we have to use the variables here. And the way you do that is by doing concatenation. So you have to make sure that you keep your SID, or which is your variable, outside the double quotes. And the way you do that is you put the double quotes here. So that's where your string ends. And then you put a plus. Then you say again a plus, because this comma need to be a part of the string. And again, you have to finish it here. So that's how basically you concatenate. It's a tedious process. In fact, there is one more thing. With sname, it's not just about the variable. Sname is actually a string, and if you want to insert string, it has to be in single quote. So that means you have to also put a single quote here. Okay, I know it is very complex, and that's okay. Let me make it a bit simple for you. Let's remove this, and let's say we have the actual values 101, and the way you put your max is you put that in single quotes. You say max here, and then you put 48. Now if I want to replace this with variables, what we need to do is we need to finish the double quotes here, and then we need to put, instead of 101, it should be SID, and then we need to put this comma in double quotes, and also the single quote, right? That's a part of a string. So you have to end it here, say plus. Now this max will be changed with sname because that's where it is coming from. Then again you have to say plus, then you have to put double quotes, and then you have to put double quotes here, then plus, and trust me, it needs practice. It's not that easy to put double quotes there. Yeah. So this is how basically you concatenate, and even after doing that, there will be an issue. And what is the issue? Let's try to understand that. We forgot one plus here. So you can see we have so many things here concatenating, and it will work. Let's try this. So run, there is no problem. Let's verify in the database. I will right click here and say view all rows, and yeah, you can see max is there, so it is inserting this. So this is cool. But then don't you think this is a tedious process where you are inserting data like this? So we don't want this plus concatenation stuff. So that's one problem. The second problem is, now since these values are coming from the user, there are certain issues with SQL which can generate SQL injections. So we need to avoid that as well. So a lot of websites get hacked, used to get hacked before because of SQL injections. So whatever query you have, basically if you can insert the data with some extra stuff, it will lead to injection. It will also lead to the leaking of data from database or updating unintended data. So that is possible. So we need to avoid that. So two things. First, we need to make sure that we don't use this double quotes and stuff, which is very confusing. Second, we need to stop SQL injection. And third, we want to improve the performance. The way you improve the performance is by caching the queries. So what if you want to execute a particular query multiple times? So every time you have the same query, the Java basically sends that query to database through the Jdbc. The same query is going from Java to database multiple times. What if you can just cache the query in the database, and every time you want to execute that, the query is already there. So that can be done with the help of prepared statement. Okay, so how do we use it? That we'll see in the next video for sure. Okay, so let's try to convert this code into a prepared statement. So what are the changes? First of all, we don't need this type of query here. But how will you achieve that? What if your data is coming from a variable? So how do we achieve that? So what we can do is we can remove this query from here, and let's write this query once more. So what you say is you say insert into, the table name is student, we know that, and we say values. What we are not sure at this point is the values, right? Because those are coming from the user in the variables. So what you can do is, for the values, if you're not sure, I mean, of course, we don't know the values yet. They are in the variables. So you can put question marks here, and that makes much more sense, right? So you can simply put the question marks here, and you can replace this question mark later. So this looks much better than the having all those plus and separators for the strings, but which we have done earlier. So what you do is you simply put question marks, and then you can replace this later. How? So first thing you do is, instead of using a statement, so I will come back here. In fact, let me remove this extra line, so that this thing will make sense. We know it is establishing connection. We know it is closing connection. So you can remove those things just to keep it simple. So instead of using a statement, let's use prepared statement. So there are two things in Java. We have a statement and prepared statement. In fact, we have one more, which is callable statement. So whenever you want to execute a stored procedure, we use callable statement. But in this course, let's focus on statement and prepared statement. So if you want to do anything which deals with updating the table itself, the structure, dropping table, or altering the table, then the statement makes sense. In fact, for select query as well, you can use statement. But for others, I think it's better to go for prepare statement. In fact, for select, when you have a where clause, always use prepare statement. Okay, so that's how we can basically use a prepare statement. The change here is when you say create statement, it gives you a reference of statement. But for prepare statement, you have another method. So you have to say con.prepare statement, if you can say this here. So this is basically the method which you're going to use. If you look at prepare statement, it is basically an interface which extends a statement. So prepare statement is basically a type of a statement with more features, right? So ultimately, even if you're using prepare statement, behind the scene, you can use prepare statement or the statements methods. So the difference is we have to use prepare statement here instead of create statement. And in this, you have to pass the query here itself. Now, as I mentioned, this will give you a pre-compiled query which you can use it for the caching purpose. Okay, so once you have done that, before executing it, of course you cannot execute this with SQL now because we have already mentioned SQL here, so this will be empty. Now before executing, don't you think we have to replace this question mark? That's very important, right? So what you can do is this st now has multiple methods, and you can see the method name like setInt, setString. So the first one is setInt. Now why this int is because we have three columns. The first one is int, the second one is string, the third one is int again. So you have to mention the type of data you're working with. So you have to say setInt, mention the column number. So it takes two parameters. First the column number and second the actual data. So the column number is 1. The data is, okay, what's the data? Data is SID. The second one is setString, where the type is, the column number is 2 and the data is sname. And the third one is st.setInt, which is the third parameter, and it is your marks. So look at this code compared to the things which we have done earlier. This looks much clean or much clear. So that's how basically we can use a prepared statement. But is it really working? Let's change the values first. Let's say this is 102 and the name is Jasmine. And let's say the marks is 52. Okay, so these are the new records we have, and let's execute this. And you can see there is no output because of course we have removed all the print statement. But let's verify from this database. So I will right click here and say view all rows. So you can see we have a new entry which is 102, Jasmine, and 52. So this is how you basically use a prepared statement. And it's not just for inserting, you can also use it for delete, update, select. The only thing you have to change is whatever data which is dynamic, you can just put that in question mark and replace the question marks. If you fail to replace the question mark, it will give you error. So that's how basically we use Jdbc with different steps. We have used statement and prepare statement as well.